Between 1690 and 1750, a relentless, horrifying tide of humanity was forced across the Atlantic. Over 600,000 African men, women, and children were transported to the island of Jamaica alone. They came from vibrant, complex kingdoms along the Gold Coast, the Bight of Benin, and West Central Africa. Dewere, Akanegbo, Yoruba, Congo people with rich histories, cultures, and families. But on the cold, brutal ledges of British slavers, their identities were erased, their names reduced to mere entries on a cargo list. The swashbuckling pirate frigates that once dominated these waters were gone, replaced by a new, more sinister kind of vessel. Ships like the Hannibal and the Adventure Galley became floating prisons, their holds packed with human beings. This journey was what the English euphemistically called the trade. For the Africans trapped within, it had another name. The Middle Passage, the sea that devoured names, the watery grave that separated them from everything they had ever known. Meanwhile, back in London, a new class of aristocrats was rising. Merchants of the Royal African Company, sitting in their comfortable offices, grew fabulously wealthy. Their account books, meticulously kept, showed Jamaica as their crown jewel, their most profitable market. They saw it as a colony with a limitless appetite for labor, a bottomless pit into which they could pour human lives for profit. By the dawn of the 18th century, the island had been completely transformed. The earthquake that destroyed Port Royal hadn't humbled Jamaica. It had merely refined its greed. Kingston's docks, once a haven for buccaneers, were now lined with auction blocks. The air, thick and heavy, smelled of salt, sweat, and the sickly sweet aroma of molasses. As historian Trevor Bernard powerfully states, the transition from piracy to plantation was seamless. It was simply one form of exploitation giving way to another, more systematic, more efficient, and far more profitable. The chaotic, individualistic plunder of pirates was replaced by the organized, industrial-scale extraction of human labor. Across the island, the landscape was being remade. Plantations spread like a consuming fire through the fertile plains of St. Catherine, Clarendon, and St. Elizabeth. The English borrowing and perfecting techniques from their first sugar colony, Barbados, carved up the land into vast estates. Each one was a self-contained engine of production, complete with grinding mills, boiling houses, and brutal gangs of enslaved workers. Where the Spanish had once grazed cattle, the English now planted sugarcane, and where pirates once risked their lives to steal a chest of gold in a single day, planters now extracted that same wealth, and much more over generations of stolen lives. Sugar became the island's miracle and its curse. Its sweetness was the engine of an empire. It filled English teacups, perfumed the grand drawing rooms of London, and financed magnificent country estates across the Atlantic. It fueled the Industrial Revolution and built fortunes that would last for centuries. But in Jamaica, the cost of that sweetness was measured in flesh and blood. Historian Richard Dunn described this brutal reality perfectly, calling it a world where sweetness and suffering were twins, each feeding the other. The cane fields, shimmering green under the Caribbean sun, looked beautiful from a distance. Up close, they were theaters of unimaginable cruelty. The roar of the sea, once the soundtrack of the island, was replaced by the constant, sharp crack of the overseer's whip. The enslaved were driven relentlessly, not just by human masters, but by malnutrition and disease. They turned the island into a factory of death and wealth. The numbers are staggering and sickening. The average life expectancy of an African arriving on a Jamaican sugar plantation was less than 7 years. For every single ton of sugar that was loaded onto a ship bound for Bristol or Liverpool, another grave was dug in the parishes of St. Thomas or St. Mary. It was a relentless cycle of consumption, not just of sugar, but of human life itself. And yet, even in this empire of iron chains and smoke-filled boiling houses, something else grew. It was something the English could neither see, nor own, nor erase. It was a memory. It was a rhythm. It was a hidden continuity, a spiritual and cultural lifeline that stretched back across the ocean. At night, in the cramped, dark slave quarters, far from the prying eyes and listening ears of the overseer, whispers filled the air. They were stories of rivers that remembered names, of mountains that sheltered the spirits of ancestors, of gods who walked with machetes and song, They called to Ogun, the warrior spirit, to Nyame, the sky god. They spoke in tongues that no whip could silence, preserving fragments of languages and beliefs from a world that had been stolen from them. They remembered the ocean. They refused to see it only as a grave, as the end of their world. In their hearts and in their stories, it became a crossing, a passage that, while brutal, had not destroyed their essence. In those quiet whispers, in those shared stories and secret rituals, rebellion began to breathe. It was a slow, deep breath, gathering strength in the darkness, while Britain celebrated its new sugar kingdom, its magnificent engine of wealth. Others were watching. High up in the inaccessible mountains of the cockpit country, the Maroon towns thrived. These were communities of free Afrikaans who had escaped the Spanish, others who had fled English plantations. They had never bowed to any master. From their mountain fortresses, they watched the smoke rise from the sugar plantations in the valleys below. They saw the endless cycle of ships arriving and departing. And they knew this age of sweetness, built on a foundation of iron, could not last forever. As the great historian Hilary Beckles later wrote, the very system that enriched the empire sowed the seeds of its undoing. For no people who remember freedom will ever cease to seek it. That memory of freedom, however distant, was a fire that could not be extinguished. And so, the 18th century dawned on Jamaica. It was an age gilded with the immense profits of sugar, yet darkened by the shadow of chains. It was an age haunted by the sound of drums that refused to be silenced, drums that beat with a rhythm of defiance. This was the moment when the British Empire in the Caribbean reached its absolute height, its peak of power and profit. But it was also the precise moment when the resistance against it began to sharpen its blade, preparing for the fight to come. It was the age of sweetness and iron. The story of what came next is a story of fire, rebellion, and the unyielding human struggle for freedom. Thank you for watching. If you found this history compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories from the past that shape our present. We'll see you in the next chapter.